I've been doing pretty good. I got to tell you, the
Yeah.
in going back and just kind of listening to just the very beginnings of the 5 times that you've done me and Paranormal You,
Yeah.
it's always just so bonkers. It's always just like I'm laughing. I guess I'm laughing now thinking about it. We always have the most bonkers beginnings. I love it.
Yeah, man. We've had some good times, dude. We've talked about some fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just from like going off for about 10 minutes straight about McDonald's and Wendy's and
Uh,
because I was just going back and listening, and it was like, oh, you didn't know about the light ice phenomena, and
Right.
asking for easy ice or light ice at drive-throughs or at Starbucks or wherever you get beverages, and how I just live that light ice life. And it's just, and I was like listening to it, I'm like, man, I was like incredibly excited about this.
I mean, it's worth getting excited about, to be honest. Like that's cool stuff. That's like a major hack, you know?
Yeah, I'm wondering, are you a little hot on your mic right now?
I might be. Hold on,
Yeah.
let me turn this down. My gain. Oh yeah, my gain is all the way up. Hold on. How's that?
Oh yeah, that's much better.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I have this
Uh,
thing. There you go.
so how the hell are you doing?
Dude, I'm good, man. It's been a wild ride since we last I don't even know the last time we spoke or recorded one of these, but a lot has happened since then in many different ways, and it's been wild, but things are really good now. I gotta be honest, it was kind of a rough couple of years leading up to like about 6 months ago. It was just like a crazy life journey. I made a ton of money in crypto, and then I spent a lot of money. I lost a lot of money, but like through that whole thing, I kind of went through like the whole cliche thing where like I had more money than I ever had. It was an obscene amount and I was kind of miserable. And like, which was like, I think when people hear like money's not going to solve your problems, like you're like, yeah, well, that's easy for you to say. Like, you have it. I would be happy if I had money, but it kind of takes like this weird struggle away that a lot of people like use money and financial difficulties to kind of like have something in place that they're like striving for. And then like once that went away, I was like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, I don't have anything to like struggle for. And so I stopped doing the podcast. I stopped making music. I stopped taking care of myself like physically. And I just like, it just got pretty dark for a while. And I had just had my third kid, and it was just kind of a crazy period. So I got kind of depressed for like almost 2 years, and then like slowly like built like kind of like clawed my way out of it, and then just started like getting back to doing the things that like actually made me feel like a person. And I'm back, but it took a while, and it was like I think I matured a lot through that process, but like it was pretty dark, I gotta say. It was definitely like a dark night of the soul type of thing. But um I've gotten back on the horse and just like kind of I've been having a good time recently, and am looking forward to just like, reconnecting with a lot of people and just like doing the stuff that was like making me feel good in life, which I kind of lost touch of because I made like the pursuit of money, like that was like all it was about for me. And like once I had a lot, I was like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if I had more and then more and then more? And it was like so cliche, but it was something that I guess I had to go through just to kind of know that that wasn't what I was looking for in life. Um, and yeah, man. Other than that, though, like things have been pretty fantastic. I'm doing really well. So yeah, dude.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're on the way up,
Yeah,
and falling out.
yeah. It was definitely like there was no other direction to go at a certain point. Like that's the beautiful thing about rock bottom is just like there's really nowhere else you can go. It's like you have no other choices. There's no more down. So it's like I'm either gonna stay here or actually start going up again. And I tend to live a life of extremes. Like that's just how I process things. So yeah, man, it was a wild ride, but I'm doing pretty fucking good now. And it's just been nice like reconnecting with everyone and kind of like, getting back in the flow of just like feeling good about stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can relate to that. The To a large degree, like, a lot has changed for me in the last couple of years, for sure.
Yeah.
I had the end of a relationship and a cohabitation relationship,
Yeah.
and boom, I mean, I was just, I was in a cavern forever
Yeah, man.
after that.
Yeah.
It took me, and it has taken me, quite a while to pick up the pieces from, Humpty Dumpty's fall off a wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's
but I'll tell you, like, and we're kind of on a similar timeline. It's interesting because I feel like the last 6 months for me, um, has been when I really started kind of activating myself, right? And especially lately, and I find so much of it has to do with just self care.
yeah. I mean,
And I mean, I'm going to the gym like 6 days a week now, and
yeah. Yeah.
I'm 47, and this is the first time in my life I'm ever like, oh my God, I missed the gym. I wish I could go to the gym right now. And then I'll go to the gym, and then like later that day, I'll be like, should I go to the gym again? And
yeah.
I'm just like, what is, I mean, I'm not like some kind of like super jacked guy, right? I'm just trying to like live longer and be more mobile and flexible when I'm 90. I'm not trying to
Yeah.
get like super jacked, but, um, and the gym's 24 hours, so it's like
That's dope.
perfect for, a weirdo like me.
Yeah, it's good to have the 24-hour gym when you get those like late night bursts of energy and you're like, I got to do something. I mean, that's also something I realized too, because like I started like really committing to getting healthy like 3 months ago. And I started working out every day and just I was like, I don't know why I ever stopped doing this because like it's so important for so many reasons. And again, it's not to be jacked. It's not to like, be like some Joe Rogan super health nut. It's just like there's a base level of energy that I have to burn off or I start to kind of go crazy. And I realized like physically getting that energy out is an incredibly valid way to do that. Also, just like the life lessons it teaches you. Like I started to realize like the consistency that like working out, like your physical body is such an allegory for like what you have to do, like imaginally or spiritually. Like you don't, like when you first start working out, after you haven't done it for a while, you're really into it. You're doing all this stuff. And like, you're like, why am I not seeing results? Like instantly, like I've been going to the gym. I've been working out for 2 weeks straight. Like, why don't I look amazing? And then you realize like, it's not going to be 2 weeks. It's going to be like a consistent thing of like over months. That's when you start to see the results. And I feel like a lot of us do that with like our manifestation stuff too. Like we're like, oh, I've been imagining this amazing life. Like, why isn't it here yet? And it's been like a week. And it's like, yeah, it takes some time and it takes some faith to actually like put in the effort to do it. And so like I found it to be like a really good analogy just for like how we like create the life we want to live because it's cliche to say, but we're constantly looking for like instant results in everything these days because that's just how we get presented everything. And it's just not how stuff works. Like it can work like that, but more often than not, it's just like this consistent repetition that like really breeds results. And like it's just an amazing lesson for I think people to learn, or when I say people, me. And yeah, man, it's been crucial. It's been crucial. I got this fucking Fitbit and it's like perfect for like a psychotic person like me who like has to see like how many steps I'm getting, how many
Yeah,
calories I'm
I
burning.
got my Apple Watch with my
Yeah.
the fitness app, and it is. I mean, it's very refreshing to chat with you because, um, because it's such a great reminder for me, on so many things, especially when you're talking about the imaginal space. And
Yeah.
I mean, and I think one feeds the other, right? And like you're talking about the body being an allegory, and it's so great because I'll be on the treadmill sometimes, and I typically will do the treadmill, you know, I try to do it for at least an hour every
Yeah.
time I go to the gym, right? And whether it's at the beginning, a little bit here, or then at the end, whatever. And while I'm on the treadmill, that is my like imaginal space where sometimes
Totally.
I'll be on the treadmill and I'll be like, and there's usually very few people at the gym when I'm there. And because I like to do it when there's not a lot of people there. And I'll just have these moments when I'm on the treadmill. It always happens on the treadmill where I'm like, oh, this is, and I'm imagining who I am, right? And I'm imagining my future self on that
Totally.
treadmill, and how that person feels. And it's great. I mean, sometimes people got to be looking at me like, why is this dude on the treadmill, like when there's nothing but like news stations on with all the most horrible stuff happening in the world? Why is he like smiling and like
Yeah.
almost laughing to himself right now? Like, what is he listening to in those headphones?
Yeah, man. I mean, I was looking back when I was like trying to dig myself out of a hole. I was like looking back at like what was I doing? Like what were the things that were getting me and keeping me and perpetuating a flow state? And it was just painfully obvious that like I was on the treadmill, I was running every day, I was on the exercise bike, and that's exactly when I had those moments too. And I'm sure it has a lot to do with like our physiology and like the endorphins are flowing and the dopamine is going, but it's like in those moments you actually have that space to actually like envision who you are. And then if you're really lucky, you get like the download that like you are that person. Like, and it's more a process of allowing yourself to be that person than like trying to be that person. I think that's where a lot of us get stuck is like we future project some version of ourselves that we're going to get to, rather like we don't create anything like that. Like these states of consciousness exist permanently, and it's like how do we move ourselves to them and through them and allow that to be. And yeah, I mean, physical exercise is just like it never ceases to amaze me like how powerful it is. And like maybe not for everyone, but I think for people who have like very active minds in particular, it's incredibly useful because that energy, if it doesn't get dispersed, like if it doesn't get like expended, it just tends to like get condensed and stagnate inside of us. And that's like when shit gets gnarly. That's when stuff gets like really, that's when like the, self-destructive thoughts can come in, the doubt, the shame, the guilt, all of those things. And if you happen to be going through like a challenging situation in your life, it can just compound on itself. And yeah, I mean, like I talk about it a lot on the podcast, and like I feel like, am I annoying people by like saying that like, it's really good to work out, it's like really good to like exercise, because it's so like it's such a like silly thing to say, but it is so incredibly important. I found in my life that like I always just like question myself, like, why do I forget this? But I also realize like that's just something we do as human beings. Like we go through these periods of falling asleep. And I think we do it like as a functional thing to like kind of remind ourselves that like we always have access to that, even when we feel like we don't, because like that's where the power is. Like I've really been trying to look at negative or challenging situations as like actually positive things, as opportunities for growth, because that's what they started to feel like for me. And I think like we start to get in trouble when we feel like something is going wrong, or like we failed, or like something didn't work out. And like, yeah, objectively that can be true, but the truth is like those are almost always like major catalysts for like very positive change if you let it be. And yeah, I mean, I just found like a few things in my life that I realize I have to be doing to like to be even close. Like I don't think we're always gonna feel like life is perfect and everything is utopic and like everything is amazing. I think we should strive for that because it's like a beautiful thing to strive for. But especially when things aren't going the way we want or not going the way we prefer, that's when we have like the ability to like employ the imaginal techniques or meditation or manifestation or whatever it is. Like that's when that stuff is really powerful, because when everything's going great, it's like easy to be in a flow state. It's easy to appreciate and be grateful for all the amazing things in your life. But when things are like difficult, that's where this stuff really comes in handy, because it's like, what do you do in those situations? You're just going to like go into full blown despondency and melancholy and just like let your life eat you. And that's just like, it never like resonated with me that that's like kind of the right approach. But I also think like everyone has gone through this to some extent over the past few years. I think it like the COVID thing was like a big starting point for a lot of people with this, because like the world just changed so quickly, like on a dime. And then after COVID, so to speak, like it just like everyone was like, okay, we'll go back to normal now, as though there's some normal that like what is that, like what, like there's no normal that never existed, but like now the blinders have been completely taken off, and like people just we just don't get an adjustment period these days. Like there's no preparation for the change that's constantly coming in. So people are just getting constantly slammed with like new stuff. And it's like no one's giving us a blueprint, right? It's kind of up to us as individuals or groups or like, friends and family to like figure out how to navigate this stuff. And I think that's why a lot of people are struggling. And it's hard, I think, for a lot of people, but that's where I tend to rely on just like our own innate ability to change our lives. Like that's constantly what I like remember is like nothing outside of there determines how my life is going. It's always inside. It's always my perspective. It's always what we choose to believe about ourselves, our lives. And that's when you can start experiencing the magic that I think like people like you and me are predisposed to like believe in. Like we've experienced it, we crave it, we love it. Like it's an amazing thing. And I think that's like a large part of why a lot of us incarnated is to experience that. But when you're just getting hit with a shitstorm over and over again, it can be really hard to remember that. And that's why like I kind of like got back into like doing the podcast and just like getting that vibe out there. Cause I think that's like, you're a comedian, you get this, like you're putting out a vibe, right? You're putting out a vibe for people to resonate with. And if it's a lighthearted, funny, cool, interesting, like thoughtful perspective, that's what people want. That's all people want. They don't really want anything else in life, just to know that other people are out there in the muck, but also kind of enjoying life as it happens. And it's not a surprise to me that like comedy is in such like a renaissance period and people are like seeking it out. Like all the podcasts I listen to are almost exclusively comedy podcasts because it's like that's what do you want to go listen to some fucking horrible geopolitical news? Like, I mean, there's enough of that bullshit around. So, I just think that's like that's all we can do at this point in the game. I do get the sense that the world is pivoting in a lot of ways and like this old way of functioning and being is just crumbling or is like already crumbled and we're kind of just like dealing with that and then we can sense that something else is taking its place but we can't really see what it is yet, so we're just trying to like figure out our way, like how to like emerge from the chrysalis into that new thing. And I think the only real tool we have is like vibrating at a certain frequency, like really trying to like hold the vibe of something that's like cool, like not just like worth living for, but like making it cool and fun. Cause what else are we doing here otherwise? Like, what else is the point? You know what I mean?
What are we doing here, right? Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I feel like you're right. I feel like we're rubble rousers, like we're walking around in the rubble,
Yeah.
trying to rouse up what's next. And I feel like you nailed it. The Because this was something that was really on my mind last night. And the world, collectively as a world, we're done. We're done with the way it's been going.
Man.
And collectively as citizens of the world who feel quote unquote powerless, I suppose, are starting to understand that I think we do have power, and especially collectively. And no longer do we want rich man wars, and and that we are powerless to stop, seemingly, when in fact we're not. I mean, if every citizen in the world who wanted peace walked out of their door right now to their state buildings and stopped all traffic and all business, I mean, the world would shut down. The entire
Yeah.
world would shut down. And I mean, I think Occupy Wall Street, to a certain degree, why it resonated so deeply with me in the early stages was because of that. It was just that very sentiment. We will occupy these spaces and we will stop this. And that's why I loved Occupy Wall Street so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right, though. And, it's, we can sit around all day and we can, complain about the world and about what's happening and the injustices that are done and specifically done to us individually, potentially. And, people have given me a hard time over the years, never in like a really serious way, about, my positive outlook and attitude and how I try to stay, you know, on the up and up with things and never surrender to despair. But, um, I mean, you look around now and it's like people aren't taught how to do that. And I don't know how I came into it. right? I got lucky and decided a long time ago that I was going to lean into it because I just knew instinctually for me, it was a survival mechanism for
Totally.
me.
Totally. Yeah.
And, it's not because I'm delusional about like the reality of the world. It's survival. I know what I need to survive and to get out of bed every day and things like that. I have to believe. I choose to believe that there is something better we can be and something better we can do. And I'm not going to surrender that belief, regardless of what anyone else may say. Like, oh, well, you're just not paying attention. It's like, no, I am paying attention. And that's why I'm doubling down on this shit.
Totally. I also think like it's just it always seemed like easy to be cynical. Like it's the easy perspective to have. Like there's so many reasons to be cynical and just like hopeless and just like be, oh, the world is, but like that never like resonated with me. And I really do fundamentally believe that individually we have so much power to change our lives, like individually and collectively, that I'm very wary of making any external factor like my God. And I think that's what we tend to do. Like I've been tossing around this idea of like the mass mind, right? If you don't have a clear direction of what you want your life to be, what you want it to look like, what your relationships want them to be, like what you want to be doing for a career or whatever it is, the mass mind, the mind of the world will be more than happy to fill in the blanks. And it'll be more than happy to tell you that this is what you're going to be doing, this is the track you're going to be on, this is the way it is. And I think all of us fall into that trap at one time or another. And I don't know it's something that we completely escape just because there are so many collective beliefs and narratives out there that like we're getting inundated with, even just subconsciously that we're not even aware of. But it never like I have too many experiences in my life of like transcending that just because of like almost a delusional belief that things are good or that they'll work out like it is. And like, I was talking to someone the other day who's like really into like chaos magic, and we were having a conversation, and he accused me of magical thinking. And I was like, this is ironic. You're like someone who's so into magic and you're saying I'm a magical thinker, kind of in like a pejorative way. And I was like, well, I mean, that's how my reality is functioned. I'm not basing this off of anything other than my personal experience. And you could say, oh, well, that's anecdotal and it's not empirical and there's no proof that that's how things work. But I'm like, yeah, but I've seen miraculous things happen when I've allowed myself to believe that. And sometimes it's harder than others to like get into that space of belief and like work with your subconscious to kind of tell yourself things that maybe external reality isn't reflecting back to you. But I just have too much personal evidence that like when I really lean into that something amazing is going to happen or there's some miraculous thing is going to take place, that it tends to happen. So even if I'm wrong about that, even if our imagination isn't God and it doesn't create everything, it's certainly more fun to believe that. And it's not harming me. It's not harming people in my life. So like, what's the other option? Just to believe that everything is like horrible all the time? And like, what does that even do? And like, especially like, with everything that's going on in the world, like all these wars and stuff, like, like what are you going to do about it? That's what I like. People will ask me like, how do you deal with like global tragedy? I'm like, well, first of all, like make sure that you know how it's impacting you emotionally. Like if it is making you feel shitty and it's making you feel bad, maybe reassess your relationship with like how you're consuming this stuff, because if you're not going to do anything about it, then what are you like what are you doing to yourself? You're just like torturing yourself and like feeling bad about things that you feel powerless about. Like what does that actually do for your psyche and your emotions? Is it putting you in a good state to like actually like work with your life? So I just tend to tell people like, of course, like I stay informed. I have opinions on, things that are going on around the world, but I don't let it dictate my mood. Like I really try to be in charge of my mood, like no matter what's going on, even if like bills are piling up and, things are getting rough out there. And, personally, like I just try to remember that like things do tend to work out. And it's irrespective of my social status, my race, my creed, like that's not what it's about. It's about like what I fundamentally believe is possible and also like what I want to do in life. Like I feel like we come here for a reason and it's not just to have fun, but for me, that's a big part of life. Like I want it to be fun and funny. That's like what is most interesting to me. And if I'm not focusing on what's most interesting to me, then like what is my life becoming? It's like not like then I'm letting some other thing dictate what's happening. And I'm just like really wary of letting anything outside of me shape my life because then that becomes your god, right? Whether it's money or the economy or the shitty politicians or the environment even, like I don't subscribe to that being what life is about. I've just learned that it really is about what internal dialogues and like mental diet you're feeding yourself. So I try to be as like aware and cognizant of that as possible. And then that's when like fun shit starts to happen. Like, because if you're not doing that, like I said, like things will just, the blanks will be filled in by what everyone else believes. And because there's so much chaos in the world these days, like it's usually not a pretty picture. Like what, I mean, that's like, and I just
Yeah.
I don't want to live in that world. Basically, that's kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah, I'm with that. And it's funny you mentioned delusion earlier, like, what is it, what does it even mean to be delusional? And it occurs to me during this conversation as we have this talk that someone will tell you that you are delusional if you are not living under the same illusion that they are.
Exactly.
That is all it is. In regards to this conversation we're having, right? I mean, right? I mean, that's a big conversation to have, I suppose. But um, oftentimes when someone says that you are delusional, it's because you're not living under the same illusion that they are, and
Yeah.
they don't appreciate that. And because I've been thinking about this a lot in my own like writing and for comedy and stuff. And for me, it's all about the fear of death. Everything comes back to that, and and when you challenge, like, like, especially when I think about like these hardcore like fundamentalist Christians who are anti-gay marriage, it's like, well, no, you can't fuck a man in the ass. And I because if I'm okay with that, that means that my God might not be real and I won't live forever. So it literally jumps from that deep to that
Yeah.
shallow for
Yeah.
them. And
Yeah.
it's what is what is our God? And for so many of us it's fear, right? And like and if people want to do something, I find this is very helpful for me. um there's this group called Earthworks. It's like an environmental nonprofit action group, right? Where they're keeping their eyes out for environmental issues and things like that. And mostly it's just like, hey, maybe pay a yearly due or a donation, but they'll send you emails and like, hey, will you sign this petition? Because, and they lay out what's happening. Like I just got one right before we started talking about Shell has a plastics plant in Pennsylvania that is devastating the local environment. And they've only been open for a year. So I signed that petition right after I read what's going on. And I feel like I'm doing something, right?
Yeah.
Even the smallest little thing can make you feel like you're doing something, because I think so many people nowadays, and maybe younger people and even older people, they think that activism is tweeting. And like, just because you're tweeting or putting something on Instagram, you're not, what are you doing? Like, and you're acting, and they think activism is social media.
Yeah.
And the argument could be made for like social awareness and raising the signal of an issue, et cetera, et cetera. But tweeting from your phone or posting something on social media, you're not, what are you really doing? Like and then it's specifically the people accusing other people of not doing anything because they're not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Like
where it gets
that's
really wild for me. It's like, oh, you tweeted once, So you're absconded of all responsibility socially and morally of the atrocities that are happening around. Um, it's, oh, I mean, I would say that they're delusional,
Mm.
but we already talked about that.
Yeah, and I mean, delusional also, like, as someone who at one point in my life was like went through like a pretty intense break from reality, whatever that means. Like, I got diagnosed at one point in my life as being bipolar. I had a classic manic episode and like really had to figure out what that meant to me in my life, and really like had to look at like the whole paradigm of mental illness, mental well-being, and like how that fit into kind of just my own life and like life at large, and like what is a spiritual awakening compared to a mental break, like where did these things kind of line up. I'm just like very um like aware that like what one person's delusion is not what the delusion of life is. It's not like just because you're not thinking the same way as someone else, that means that you're a crazy person and the person who subscribes to all the things that are consensus reality is a sane person. Because a lot of people who are just like completely entrenched in the ways of the world, just like the 3D reality of how things work, scientific materialists, whatever you want to call them. There's no like, that doesn't mean that you're right. It doesn't mean that that's like the right way of going about things. And like, I've been very vocal about just kind of my, um, opinions on mental health, just because, especially nowadays when everyone seemingly has some type of mental health diagnosis, and, everyone's autistic, or everyone's, OCD, or everyone's, on a spectrum of something. It's like we forget that these are just like at best symptoms that people have identified and like kind of grouped and lumped into these boxes that then get called something. Like, those are just made up things. Like, there isn't really something called ADD or OCD. It's just we've identified symptoms that we say, oh, well, when we see all these things, we'll call that person OCD. And I'm very wary of that, because I just think we don't realize how much of an impact that has on our individual psyches. Like, if we can just say, oh, well, I am this because I have these behaviors, or I have this kind of mental makeup or psychological profile. It's almost, I don't want to say it's a cop out. Like, I'm very respective of people's diagnoses. And if they believe that they have these things, that they should do whatever they can to kind of alleviate any suffering in their lives. But I think we're very quick to kind of assign labels to our identity that typically don't serve us. And like, for me, it's very simple. Like, am I hurting myself? Right? Am I hurting people around me? Are my relationships being affected by my perspectives or my actions? And if the answer is no to all of those, then like, do whatever the fuck you want to do. Like, don't feel that you are somehow not conforming to what being mentally well is, because that's a very nebulous term. Like, and it's just like, it's not something that actually means something. And I think that's really important for people to remember, because a lot of the things that are the most powerful in terms of like evoking change in our lives, and like being the person we want to be, or being, achieving the things we want to achieve, they're weird. They're not like normal things. They're not like regular things that everyone should believe. Like, people in like the 40s or 50s, like, work hard and get a job and have a family, and say, all right, sure, like, if that's what you're into, but like, that's one way of going about life. And I see all of these new kind of perspectives and ways of living life emerging, and people being more comfortable with kind of subscribing to those ways of being. And I think that should be encouraged, because a lot of people will look at some behavior or something that they're doing, or even a perspective or outlook, and be like, well, that doesn't conform to the consensus of what everyone else believes. And so they shut it down, which to me is like a shame, because like the weirdness is, that's what makes people interesting. That's where like you can really discover something about yourself and the world that like is fascinating, and you can be curious and playful with reality, rather than it being some, difficult path of suffering, and it just gets harder, and there's no relief, and you're always going to have these struggles and problems. And it's like, even if that's true, like, wouldn't you like some perspective that makes that like kind of a fun game for you to figure out, rather than just like this shitty existence that's going to just like beat you down until you die? Like, that to me seems like a waste of a life in a lot of ways. So I always just try to remind people that, like, whatever you believe about your mental health, like, you're going to know better than anyone else. Right. And it's not saying to people, don't go and try to treat symptoms that are making you feel bad. But like, don't necessarily subscribe to these ideas of what a mentally healthy person is. Like, it's okay to be weird and eccentric and not to think like the other people around you. That's how things get done in this world. Like, it is the nonconformists that create like the amazing art and comedy and music and all these incredible things that so many of us resonate with. It's precisely because they're not thinking like everyone else that allows that stuff to come to the surface. So I'm always just trying to challenge the idea of like, what does mental well-being even mean, right?
I mean, I love that. I mean, it is the weird, the weirdos who see the world differently,
Yeah, man.
and eventually, depending on how unique of a perspective it might be, what's interesting is the pendulum swing,
Right.
and how this so weird becomes the mainstream,
Totally.
and then people start fighting anything that is against that mainstream when
Right.
originally it was the weird.
Right.
And which is, so it's just that endless cycle, right? That you're, yeah. And so so that's an interesting aspect to me. But I think when it comes to specifically what you're talking about, mental health and having different perspectives and even feeling different, it's such a big conversation in the world of the paranormal,
Yeah.
because when you have experiences that the scientific world is not ready to validate, at least in a consensus way. And I love this consensus reality idea. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's one of those, it's one of these great things I always forget about. But um, I had a conversation earlier today with a psychiatrist who's been 25 years into, you know, trying to figure out if someone's mentally ill or if they're demonically possessed.
Yeah. Cool.
And it was a really refreshing conversation from someone who's very grounded scientifically, yet very open spiritually into the immaterial world. And it is maybe not that far away from a future where all other aspects of paranormal experience potentially have that same kind of, quote unquote, validation or footing in a scientific community. Because there are these, scientists, there are doctors like the guy I talked to today, who they're willing to put their name on it,
Yeah.
so to speak, right? And skeptics be damned. Come at them if you want. I mean, there's a few different people throughout history that I think I just never would have. I never would have wanted to be on the other side of the debate table. There's this guy Ivan Sanderson who was like, like one of the very first cryptozoologists, right? This really brilliant, like British botanist guy. And you listen to his interviews and, you know, fare thee well, debater of Ivan T. Sanderson, because you are up
Yeah.
for it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you've got your hands full if you come at this guy and you try to call him stupid, silly, crazy,
Right. Like a quack.
etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because he will dress you down. And that rare combination of just being brilliant yet articulate, and you know it's just really refreshing when that happens. And I think we're getting there in other areas of the world of the paranormal, the strange and the weird and the esoteric. And the occult, I think, has had those kind of characters, obviously, throughout history, who have, they've kind of had more of those characters who have been like eloquent
Yeah.
and charming and compelling, you know uh who have drawn people to them, and that's why I think those people are, that area is a little more well known maybe, but um than some of this other stuff. But it is interesting to try to remember that just because we experience and feel something that isn't easily explainable, that there's not something wrong with us.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, some of the most interesting experiences, I'd say predominantly the most interesting experiences of my life, have been immaterial, right? They are internally, or like some magical paranormal thing that's happened that's really like shaped a core foundation of my belief structure and my life. And this stuff isn't empirically tested a lot, nor can it be sometimes. And I think that's where like the paradox comes into when you're looking at paranormal things or magical things, is that this stuff is sneaky, right? In the same way that like the, you know what I mean? Like
I
you
mean, if
can't.
I hope people are watching the video of this,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
they can see that this stuff is
It
sneaky.
is. I mean, it is. It moves around. You can't pin down like some of this esoteric, ethereal stuff. But to me, rather than that invalidating it or making it lesser, it makes it more interesting. It makes it more like intriguing and curious to pursue. And then, of course, there are aspects of the paranormal or esoteric that are testable. I mean, that was my favorite thing when I found the imaginal techniques, right? I am very like leery of someone who says, "Oh, I found this secret way of dealing like with magic. Take my word for it. Like I know what it is. Believe me." That doesn't do it for me. I don't care if it's religion, if it's science, if it's art or whatever it is. If they're saying take my word for it, my anti-authoritarian like inner nature comes out. I'm like, fuck that. That sounds super sketchy. But if someone says, "Hey, here's some stuff that I found. Go experiment with it. Go test it out. Go see if it works for you." That's when like I can really start to like get behind something, because then I can go and test it. And that's exactly what I found with the imaginal techniques is I was like, all right, let me test this shit out. It sounds interesting. It lines up with my personal experience, but let me go like actually test this shit out and see if it has some impact. And when I did that, it was astounding how well this stuff worked. And then as I learned more about it and kind of learned about the mechanisms behind it, kind of about how our subconscious works and how our subconscious generates a lot of experience. And that lined up with like my interest in Carl Jung and a lot of the psychoanalytical stuff that he pioneered or kind of spoke about. It was cross-disciplinary. It wasn't just relegated to one aspect of life or science or nature. And that those universally applicable kind of trains of thought, that to me is like a validation. That to me is more substantial than a test that's been replicated hundreds of thousands of times, and that empiricism is how we determine how something works. And also I just like, I mean, any student of science knows that science is constantly being proven wrong, right? Like 800 years ago, people thought the earth was the center of the universe, and the smartest people in the world, like actual geniuses, were sure of it. And then now it's commonplace to know that like, no, well, I mean, flat earthers and things like that, but like for the most part, people are like, yes, the earth is not the center of the universe, not even the center of our solar system, let alone the universe. So like we know that these things are constantly being overturned. So like, what do you do with that knowledge? Do you then put your blind faith in science because someone who you don't know said something that sounds true, and then you start to believe that? Well, that's no different than just like full sail believing the doctrines of a religion. You know, there's literally no difference between that type of faith and the faith of in a higher being and a guy in a sky who's controlling your life. So you have this laboratory of your own consciousness, your own perspective, which is the only inescapable aspect of reality that we know, right? That is always there. Even if you take a lot of drugs and have an ego death situation, it's still fucking there. It's still there, kind of observing what is happening, even if you have no sense of who you are. It still exists. And so, like, that to me is the mechanism that we can use to like parse whether things are true for us, and also being open-minded enough to like not be so fixated on the way something has to be, and letting our opinions and our beliefs change over time. That looseness that I think is critical for any like explorer of the paranormal or the esoteric, that you have to have a sense of open-mindedness, because if that turns into rigidity in that particular field, that's when you get stuck. That's when you start to have to defend a position for your ego to be right, rather than just being open up to like the true mysteriousness of what's going on. Like I've been accused of being a flip-flopper at various points in my life, because I do change my mind. I change my mind a lot. I really do,
I
because
Oh
yeah.
my God. It's so funny because I was so upset. And this was a long time ago, not that long, but when Al Gore was running for president against George W. Bush. And one of the big things was that Al Gore was a flip flopper.
Yeah.
And I was just over here yelling as loud as I could, but this is a good thing.
Yeah.
He learns new information and changes his mind.
That's what you want.
But it was such a negative thing, and it was effective. And well, although we know he won the election, but
Yeah, I
yeah,
protested at the Supreme Court. Actually, I was in Maryland, and I went to the Supreme Court to protest that decision. I was so naive back then.
yeah,
Gosh.
it's like, but it's one of those things where like, yeah, I didn't want to cut you off about flip flopper, but you're right. I mean, it's such a good thing to be a flip flopper.
Well, I mean, like, how do you expect to evolve your perspective or awareness if you can't be open minded? Also, like, my kids have taught me a lot about like a pretty good way to approach the world. And we were kids once, even though we kind of forget exactly what our perspective it was, we can tap into it. But like, everything is open for them. There is no rigid belief that they feel compelled to subscribe to, because they're experiencing so many new things any given day that they have to be open-minded, right? That's just the way they're figuring out and navigating life. And as we tend to get older, we start to build components of our identity that then make that harder to kind of do, because we feel like if we let go of this opinion or this belief, we're losing some part of ourself. Even though these are just things we've added on and kind of retrofitted to our psyche, it feels like we're losing some fundamental part of who we're being. And I recognize this in like the imaginal and the manifestation stuff. Like sometimes right before you're really about to hit like kind of a breakthrough point, and you're really about to step in, jump a timeline, whatever you want to call it, move through dimensions, is it can actually feel like death. It can actually feel like you are going to die. And I don't even mean that in a metaphorical sense. You may think that like, oh my God, I'm going to die. Like something is going to happen. Like I'm too close to the precipice of understanding something, because our ego and our psyche doesn't want to lose aspects of its identity, because it feels like a death process. It feels like you're letting something go that makes you you. And if you lose that, you won't be you, and maybe you won't exist anymore. And this was always one of the knocks on psychedelics when I first started taking them when I was a teenager, is people would be like, well, I heard it changes you. Like you'll be a different person. I'm like, have you lived life? Like, have you lived life? You're a different person every fucking moment of the day. There are many times throughout a day where I'll be like, this is the best fucking day ever. And then something happens and I'm like, this day fucking sucks. Like that happens within a day. So you think like over the course of your life, you're not going to be changing who you are. I also think like I was just kind of like, whether lucky, some people would say unfortunate. Like I started getting heavily into psychedelics like when I was like 15 years old. That's when you're starting to build your sense of self and really like crystallize it. And psychedelics do just the opposite. So I never really had this process of like fully believing in myself as a person. Like I just like I skip that. I'm like, well, like I know there's these things I say that I am and feel like I am, but I also know those things are very impermanent and constantly changing. And I think it's I don't want to say easier at all times, but it's like I found it's a nice way to move through life, to be malleable and to be fluid with your beliefs, your perspectives, your situations, because you just like everyone who looks back at their life 5, 10 years ago, at the time you thought you were the smartest, you were at the cutting edge, you had learned so much, you knew all of these things. And then you look back and you're like, oh my God, like I was kind of a fucking idiot, like in a lot of
Constant
ways.
embarrassment to myself.
Right. Yeah. And so like it's just like you gotta be like, and to some people that might be disheartening and like, oh, well, like, are we actually making progress? But I do think awareness and an ascension process is a spiral. It's not just this linear upshot of like a vertical graph up and to the right. It is a spiral. And what a spiral means is that when you're going round and round, even if you're at a different level, you are still kind of going through similar experiences. But it's like, how does your awareness and perspective change based on your experiences, based on your life, your emotions, your feelings? Like, how does it like complement that and allow it to be something that's more aware rather than constricting your awareness and kind of getting dug in? And I think when you dig in, that's when we get this massive polarization, right? That's when people look out at the social media landscape and you're either pro this or against that, or you're for this or you're against that. And like I learned this in a very acute way with the vaccines, right? I didn't get vaccinated. I just always seemed kind of weird to me. My wife was very not into the vaccines. My mom was very not into the vaccines. I trust them as smart women. So I was just like, I'm not getting the vaccine. And, I wasn't an anti-vaxxer, right? But I spoke about it on the podcast, and man, I got so many messages of people being like, you're an anti-vaxxer, you're this, you're that. I'm like, I'm not. Number one, like my kids are vaccinated for a lot of the regular vaccines. Like I believe in modern medicine. It isn't something that like I'm against, but like it didn't make sense to me. It came out too quick. It seemed weird. But people were so quick to take a stance on it that I think now looking back, it's like a little more clear that maybe it wasn't like the smartest thing to do. But like people almost need to have those opinions and like fall on one side of like the right or wrong spectrum, just because it solidifies like who they are as a person. Like that becomes their identity. And to me, that just always seemed like silly, kind of like that's like I have opinions, of course. I believe things, but I'm not so dug in that like I'm not open to the gray areas or the nuance or like even just being completely wrong about shit. So I know that helps people kind of like navigate life, because your ego is trying to do that. It's not some bad thing that's like so mean and like, oh, I'm a narcissist. It's not like that. It's just trying to help you get through situations. It's telling you if a lion's about to attack you, run away. It's a self-preservation type of thing, but that's not really how society functions anymore. We're not constantly fending off lion attacks, but we are kind of put in a position to have to react to certain like energies and ideas. And that is what I think people are starting to cultivate and be aware of. And people who have been sensitive to that for decades or maybe their whole lives have kind of felt out of place most of the time, because that's not how society has functioned. It wasn't like based on your feelings or the vibes you got or the energetics. That was like, hippies did that type of thing, unserious people. And it's like, that's kind of the blueprint we will need as individuals. And we need now to navigate what's going on, because like, well, I mean, I don't know how else you're going to do it. You're not going to do it by taking a righteous stance on a political event. I can tell
Wait,
you
wait,
that.
wait, wait. Let me tell you why you've never been more wrong and are
Yeah,
a fucking
exactly.
idiot because of that. Uh, yeah, I think I love this idea too that I don't know when it started happening where hippie started having some negative connotations.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, in what universe is am I currently occupying where we think we're going to try to have hippies have be the problem?
Yeah, that's it. That's destroying society. It's the hippies, of
Because they're not
course.
productive members of society, paying their taxes, contributing to the overall system and the mechanism of capitalism, which is our Lord and Savior. And let me tell you another thing about that. You know, they 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 have sex with more than one person, and
How dare they?
that bothers me.
And like the funniest thing about like the people who that bothers, like you just learn this about people as you grow up. It's like those are the people who wish more than anything they could be having sex with more than one people. Like that's literally like their biggest desire. Like anyone who's so against any of that stuff, like that's what they want to do more than anything else. And it's a shame they feel like they can't do that. Like I really I wish everyone could pursue and allow themselves to be open and feel good about what they wanted to, but um that's not how the system is typically set up, right? There is this weird restrictionism that people, I believe ultimately it's self-imposed. I want to be very clear about that. Like I very rarely veer off into like, oh, well, the government is doing this, or even capitalism. Like there are components of all of these things that contribute to systems that certain, like, I mean, the criminalization of drugs, like there are things that are just like bad policy that are not helping things. But ultimately, people live within those systems who transcend those systems in all walks of life, right? And it is not just based on privilege. It's not just on being a cis white male, from a middle, class family. I know so many people from so many different walks of life who I've seen move through different worlds of society, completely irrespective of where they came from or like what they've learned. Like it is an innate kind of thing, but it's a very big leap, I think, for people to like completely buy into that concept wholesale, because what you're basically saying is I have 100% accountability and responsibility for my life, good and bad. Everything that happens is ultimately based on my belief. And that's freeing on one hand, and that's liberating and it's empowering, but it's also terrifying and super fucking annoying because you can't blame the asshole who did that fucked up thing to you, even if there was an asshole who did a fucked up thing to you. Like you recognize this is some self generated aspect of reality that gave you an experience that you're supposed to do something with, right? It is not a flaw or error in, the matrix or society. And so it's kind of like, I think all of us choose how long we exist in that awareness. And I think for my life, there's been like major oscillations in terms of like where I'm fully believing that to like almost an insane degree. And there are times where I'm so out of touch with it, where it just absolutely feels like the outside world and the circumstances and the people in it are dictating the terms of my life. But I do tend to believe that that's a misperception. And when I really examine it, I can see how the thoughts and the ideas and the feelings I was experiencing inside of me were actually contributing to those experiences. Well, I've been saying this recently, like getting mad at reality for not being the way you want it to do or waiting for it to change to tell you something about yourself is like looking in the mirror and waiting for yourself to like wave back to yourself. Like that, it's never going to happen. That mirror world is never going to be the thing that goes like, hey, you have to do it. And then it will be reflected back to you. And basically like, the past 5-10 years, I mean, probably my whole life, but I've been speaking about it more, is how do we kind of get in touch with that? How do we harness that? How do we work with ourselves so no matter where we are in life, downtrodden, down and out, down to our last dollar, about to be homeless, relationships got horrible, all these things, or just like super in flow, everything is great. Like there's a whole way to work with these kind of subtle, like energetic things that are applicable for any of those situations. And it's like learning like a piano. It's like learning all of the notes on a piano. And sometimes the notes and the chords are discordant, and you learn that and you really maybe even realize there's a place for that. But then it's about like, all right, you've learned your notes. You understand the spectrum of emotion. You understand on some level that your inner being does create reality. Now, what song are you going to play? Like now, with your knowledge of how these things work, what do you want that melody and harmony to be? Maybe you want it to be some spooky, scary, thing, and you want to play those eerie chords, and or maybe you want it to be just sweet and angelic and great, and maybe you want it to be a juxtaposition. I just think you should. It behooves people to recognize that ultimately they are the person that gets to determine what song is being played. But if it doesn't feel like that, you usually get some messed up, weird stuff in there.
Yeah,
And
you got to remind me I mean, you were talking about it earlier. When you're talking about, anti-authority, take my word for it. But then on the other hand, the imaginal techniques, I'm trying to remember why is the name Stanton Friedman coming to my brain, but that's someone else.
yeah,
But like, where was like if someone's like trying to uncover these
techniques.
same
Yeah.
sources?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been doing a lot of research on like where it actually comes from, like tracing it back, like going from now to back. So, reverse chronological order. The person who I discovered was Neville Goddard, was this
Yes, Neville
dude.
Goddard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And he was very clear. What stuck me to him and really made it like just like connect with something. And then I found out like his biggest mystical vision that he ever had in his life, which he called being reborn, like was like a completely transcendent in this moment towards the end of his life, was on my birthday, like my
Oh,
birth date. It wasn't when I was born, like he was dead before I was born, but it was July 20th. And I'm like, oh, that's fucking weird. That's like, a little wink from the universe.
that's
But
cool though.
he said something that I had experienced on not insignificant amount of mushrooms in college, where I had this acute experience for about 2 weeks where I knew this wasn't a thought, it wasn't like a weird delusion, but I knew for certainty that I was Jesus Christ. And it wasn't like I'm Jesus Christ and no one else is. I was like, this is something that everyone can innately experience, but I was Jesus Christ. And that awareness I was feeling and the flow and what I was able to create and experience in my life was this state. And I never really knew what to make of that because it was such a wild thought and just like awareness to have. It didn't functionally like really do anything. I made the mistake of telling a few people around me that I was Jesus Christ. That is a good way to make someone think immediately that you're insane. But I didn't really know what to do with that experience. But yet I had it and it was profound and it stuck with me. Years later, when I got tipped off to Neville Goddard from Mitch Horowitz, who's like a modern occult writer, super cool guy, who's kind of like found and revitalized a lot of these new thought people from the past 100 years or so. I was listening to these talks. I found them on the internet, not great quality. And he kept saying, like, your imagination is God. The awakened state, when you fully understand what that means, is called Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was not a man. None of the characters in the Bible are people. They are psychological states of awareness that you move through. And that's the story they're trying to tell you. And all these parables aren't literal. And people who take them literally are off the mark. And when you think of God, when you think of I am, when you hear God, if you go to something outside of you, even if it's the universe, some vague notion, you failed the test. That's wrong. It is actually your imagination. It is your sense of I am. It is an aspect of the divine. It is the animating force of everything you see outside of you. And he was just very clear about that. And he kept saying it's Jesus Christ. And I'm like, huh, that's weird. That kind of lines up to these thoughts and these feelings that I was having back then, which felt very profound and like I was kind of fully present and essentially just a loving awareness. That's what it felt like to be Jesus Christ, a loving awareness for all that you see and are and experience. That's the way I would describe it as best as I could. So I started listening to this guy. And then he started laying out very practically how to prove this to yourself and to operate two things he referred to as the law And then later in his life, the promise, which is the more esoteric kind of like religious, that's where he lost a lot of people. There were less people coming to his lectures when he started talking about the promise, because it's very like, it's not practical for most people. The law is incredibly practical. There, it is applicable. It is a neutral law. It can summon wonderful things. It can summon unlovely things. So it is not like it's good or evil. Morality is not implied. We look out in the world, and if you externalize God, you could say, well, how could a God, some benevolent being, allow suffering to exist? How could there be starving children and babies and all this horrible things in the world? It's like, it's you, it's us, we're doing it. Like, we believe in these things. People act out of the belief that these things exist and need to happen. Therefore, it's created. It's a neutral law. We are constantly summoning states of consciousness that we assent to and believe in. And so his basic premise and theory, and this is shared with a lot of new thought, and I'll move one step back from him after this, but basically the imaginal techniques are very simple. There's many different ways of working with them. These are widely available in lots of different kind of ways. Nowadays, you have a sample pattern of manifestation techniques, but essentially all they're doing is trying to impress a conscious thought onto your subconscious. And his process was relatively simple, is before going to sleep, or putting yourself in kind of a groggy, what he would refer to as a state akin to sleep, just this weird liminal boundary before you're asleep, but when you're going to sleep and you're kind of like loosey-goosey, you're kind of going in and out of awareness. You visualize a scene from your own perspective. So you're climbing the ladder. You're not watching yourself climb a ladder like it's a movie. You're climbing the ladder from within your own perspective. You, before this, determine a goal or a desire or a wish or something you would like to experience. It could be a state of consciousness, of whatever it is. You envision a scene that implies that it's already happened, right? So some action, whether that's a conversation with a friend, you telling them something, them saying, oh, that's wonderful, or just something you'd be doing. So if you wanted a new car, you'd be in the car, driving the car, and you'd imbue it with as much vividness as possible, sensory vividness. So what you would see, what you would hear, what you would feel, what you would touch or smell, if those are involved. And then the most important part is you charge it with the emotion you would feel if it were true. That's it. You just charge it with that emotion that you know you would feel if it had already happened. And then as you do that, you drift off to sleep. And this is something you can practice as much or as little as you like. But if you try it and try it with any type of persistence, and then eventually you'll develop the skills of faith, which is just loyalty to the unseen world, and expectancy. So genuinely expecting it to happen and noticing your reactions validate that expectancy. Then it happens. So I employed this as faithfully as I could when I was in a situation that really, I was having a second child. I was in a very not great financial position. I had left a previous kind of career and was just not making enough to like support my family, or I wasn't about to be making enough to support my family. And so I just did it for like basic stuff, first for money. And then immediately within a month, like I had this YouTube channel. It started making me like $4,000, $5,000 a month out of the blue with very little effort on my part. I had never done anything more than maybe like $8 a day to that point. And I started doing for other stuff. I started doing it for my life, for my career, for my creativity, for how I wanted to feel, right? I wanted to feel joy, peace, ease, harmony, love. And all of those things started coming in waves. And so I started talking about it more and started telling people about it. And sure enough, people would report back the same things were happening to them. So I was just like, okay, there's some reliable thing that can be used and tested, and it seems to work. And so then just the more I discovered about it, I just realized like it is this process of just modulating our beliefs, and the efficacy of that particular technique really lies within the fact that you're putting yourself in a accepting state of mind, right? That's that liminal state of being, going to sleep or having just woken up, or putting yourself in a meditative state that primes your subconscious to be accepting. Then you feed yourself a scenario that feels like real life. that you imbue with emotion, which is the charge that allows your subconscious. That's what your subconscious does. It just accepts your feelings constantly. We are not always in control, seemingly, or aware of what our feelings are. And so that's why things can get out of hand. Um,
Hello.
yeah, exactly. Like everyone. So that ultimately is all that we're doing. And then the premise essentially is that your imagination, being God, being the creator, whatever you would like to refer it to it as, is a higher dimensional reality. That space where you're imagining in your imagination, that's a higher dimensional reality, and it cascades down into this reality. It naturally flows into this reality, and so your reality feeds you on the screen of this reality what you had imagined. And that's what we're all doing all of the time. We think like, oh, well, maybe I should try that and do this. Of course, you should direct it as with as much awareness as possible would be my recommendation. But you're always doing it. Like no one turns this off. It's not like there's a switch and we turn it off. We can forget we're doing it. We can not know that we're doing it. But the beauty of it, obviously, to me, is that you can test it out. Like you just try it out. There's no like real barrier to this, but you'd be amazed how many people don't try it out or get mad at the suggestion that this is how something could even work ever. And we'll let that prevent them from either enjoying it or fighting virulently against it. And then where I think Neville Goddard got this stuff from was from this Black Ethiopian Jew named Abdullah, who he met when the dude must have been like 90, and there are reports he lived to like 115, something like that. But he was this guy who lived on the Upper West Side, I think, of New York, had this place that was given to him by some like Rockefeller cousin. It was like this amazing place. And he used to teach seminars and classes. And he practiced kind of some combination of the Kabbalah and this esoteric branch of Judaism that comes from Ethiopia. And it essentially is what all the mystics throughout all time and recorded history have been saying, is that our consciousness has this ability to create reality. And that is kind of the only reality we know. But it was a very practical way of teaching that I think people like you and me like can employ in a practical way. And I think ultimately that builds our faith and kind of belief in, you know, the mystic, the numinous, the stuff that we can't see, that some of us have like an innate craving for, the spiritual, just like that. There's something there that some of us just seem naturally predisposed to be interested in. Now it's a little bit harder to figure out if you're one of those people. I mean, you remember this, Ryan, because like when we were younger, if you wanted to learn about the occult or the paranormal, it was like a chore. You had to go to a library, hope that they had this, or meet someone who knew something about something. I was thinking about how weird it is now that it's completely flipped, where you, as a spiritual aspirant, you really had to put in some physical, real world effort to carve out a path to do it. Where now, like, there seems to just be like base level spirituality all over social media. Everyone is in touch with the vibes or whatever it is at any given point. And it's just like you have to sift through that like a gold digger to like figure out what's actually going to work and resonate with you. It's just a very different way of approaching things, I think, now, which is, it comes with its own challenges that, some of us were able to see the distinction. But yeah, I mean, this stuff is timeless. This is not like some brand new concept of how to manifest things. And then I think there are just subtle differences. Like, I don't really believe in things like the law of attraction as they're explained per se, just because it presupposes there is some outside world out there where you're bringing stuff to you, where what I think is more accurate is that like everything exists. There are these eternal things and states that exist, and you direct yourself towards those, or the experience of enjoying or having those things, by attuning your internal world. That to me feels more of what the process is like, rather than like creating and bringing something to you. I don't take this physical. I really view it much more like a dream, a very convincing dream, but a dream than probably most people understand me to actually mean it as. Like, I really believe it is a dream. Like, I'm quite sure of it at this point. It's much closer to what we do at sleep at night and think we're there. That's very close to what we're doing here.
Wow, that's wild. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't wait to be halfway asleep tonight.
Yeah. That's the feeling you should have, I think, when you find and hear and remember this stuff, because you get to try it out, right? Like, you really like see what happens. It's amazing. I am in a very beneficial position because I've spoken about this for, some years now, and I encourage people to get in touch with me for, I can imagine things for them, or they can tell me about, and I get inundated with just experiences of people having tried this and really going through some incredible change. We're talking about things related to like cancer, to like, having no job, being homeless, to amazing turnarounds in very short periods of time. And people could be like, well, it's going to happen anyway. But it's like, people know the difference when everything they've been trying and their situation hasn't changed, to when they try something like this and like, oh, wow, something shifted. Like, what? That's quite interesting. So I trust that. Like, that's enough science for me. That's enough empiricism for me, even if it's purely anecdotal.
Well, I mean, I guess, it's historical data.
To me, it
Um,
is. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, I was just talking about historical data today. I mean, like these conversations, this is such a great synchronicity. Uh, of all things, I gotta, I gotta pee.
Yeah, that's
So,
totally cool.
let's pause this real
Yeah,
quick.
yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna pause it. Okay, then let's just stop and then re-click the link, and it'll be a separate file. Make it easier to
I
keep
have a
it
chop.
separated.
I have a break in there, but yeah, like, what we can do that too. Let's stop and then we'll get that. Okay, let's do
Okay,
that.
cool, cool.